This is part 2 of 2 of our D&D ranking of all classes.
Number 6.
So my number 6 is the cleric, and I was considering putting the cleric a lot higher on my list. In fact, just from when I first wrote this list to the time that I revised it, like basically the second time that I revised it, I had the cleric a lot lower, but after some consideration, I buffed it up a hell of a lot to 6.
That's why you have them in the middle of the road, and at least they're not trash.
And the reason why I have my cleric at 6, and I was considering putting it even higher, is because despite what the cleric, all the memes about the cleric's the healer, the cleric is always the healer, the cleric is probably one of the more versatile of classes. It can do pretty much anything, I feel.
Right.
Yeah, I was definitely going to put the cleric even higher than number 6, but it's just the other ones, I feel like I have more to say and more praises to sing, even though I've played a cleric before, actually. But just the cleric's got everything. If you want a cleric that does damage, you can just go strength, go your wisdom, go constitution, wear heavy armor, and just bonk everything, then blow them up with powerful spells like spiritual weapon and spirit guardians. Clerics have a lot of powerful damage spells because they're thought to be the support, when if you build them right, you can build them into the most brutal tank and fighter ever. Or if you want to be more controlling, they have a lot of powerful control spells like command, suggestion, mass suggestion, things like that. And of course, they can be great healers with all the different healing spells and all their subclasses based around healing and keeping people alive.
Listen, I agree. So I have them ranked higher, and we'll get there a little bit. But my whole thing is, realistically, other than like high damage, they do everything else perfect. The top 6, top 5, I think that they're all just powerhouses, and I have the cleric up there.
Yeah. The top 5, I really don't have anything too negative to say about them. So from now on, it's kind of smooth sailing.
What's your number 5?
Number 5.
My number 5, I think we all saw this one coming, the Wizard.
Yeah. So why do you like the Wizard?
The Wizard is basically the sorcerer. It's basically a jack of all trades, but this time it's a jack of all trades that can be a jack of all trades, but is also can be a master of one.
Yeah. The Wizard can do everything.
Basically, the thing that makes it a jack of all trades isn't that it can do everything, is the fact that it has the possibility to do anything, and then you can make it into a master of one after you've built it.
Yeah, the Wizard, Harry Potter. Come on, who doesn't like Harry Potter?
Yeah. If you want to build something that's based around controlling the battlefield, you have a subclass and just a huge, huge spell list that helps you do that. You want to focus on damage, take Evocation Wizard, and now you are basically God.
I'll get to where I think they're ranked a little later, because again, I have them ranked higher, but realistically, they're just the best spellcast. They're not my number 1.
Yeah, as you can tell, we haven't talked about all the spellcasters yet.
Yeah, so my number 5 is the Druid. I just like the Druid again. They're really powerful what they do. They're really magic user. You're right with the critique with the metal and the one so forth, but the Star Druid, or whatever exactly, Star Druid. I should probably bring that up in front of me, but the Star Druid, I think they're way more versatile than you. They're the best meat shield in the game. Well, that's probably not true, but yeah, maybe. They're probably the best meat shield because you can just turn into like a bear 3 times a day and then never die. If you die as a druid, you fucked up. And again, you don't watch Critical Role, or you turn into a goldfish and you deserve to die. I'll have to send you that video if you don't know what I'm talking about. So.
Gotcha. But one thing that I forgot about the Druid, which you just reminded me of, is the Druid has a lot of great and interesting subclasses. Unfortunately, they all get completely overshadowed by Moon Druid.
Yep. Everybody plays the Moon Druid.
The Star Druid is one of my favorites just because of all the cool lore behind it and its cool abilities. But it gets completely overshadowed by Moon Druid, which isn't very dynamic. I mean, it increases the CR that you can transform into, which allows for more creatures, which is definitely more dynamic. I just feel like it kind of grows horizontally more than expands.
Yeah, you do a very cool thing extremely well. That's why I think they're so powerful.
And that leads to a lot of game breaking, which is one of my critiques earlier, is that the Druid's good, but it's not very balanced, at least when you encounter a Moon Druid.
My top 5, the Druid is... the top 5. I think all 5 of them actually should be nerfed, or frankly, actually, I think everything else should be brought up to these 5. Like, these 5 are where I think a party should just be. To be fair, I think the Barbarian belongs in a party, but because I think they're a great meat shield, and that's not a role people appreciate enough, but The druid, yeah, needs shield, so on and so forth. My number 4 is do you have anything to say about druid? Again, we'll talk more about individual things later.
Yeah, we'll talk about the showcase later, but yeah, I pretty much said everything that I wanted to say in both of our segments.
Right. So the bard is my number 4.
Number 4.
They're the best. They're just the funnest to play. Like, I have nothing bad to say about the bard, other than the fact that, like, yeah, they could do a little bit more damage, but, like, come on, they're badasses.
They're meant to be the support,
but they're meant to be a support, but they're not. They could take out if they could be the leader of your party. They could be the wizard. They're the entertainer. They could be your survivalist. Because if you like, I just think that they're like A's and B's across the board when it comes to stats, role play. Like, I have nothing bad to say about the bard. Now the people who want to play the bard, those are the problem. That we'll get into that down the road. Can I seduce the door? No.
Yeah, as someone who's played in a lot of parties that pretty much always had a bard in them, unfortunately, the "can I sleep with a dragon, can I seduce the door" meme is a little bit taken too far.
Right.
And I wish it was just a meme, but it is taken very literally by some players.
Well, we kind of talked about a few of the cliches. The reason why I feel like maybe the wizard's lower in your list because of the fireball meme.
The wizard's a little bit lower, primarily just because the others I have more positive things to say about them. Also, one thing that I didn't really cover about the wizard is that they're an absolute glass cannon.
Oh, we'll get into that when that is their major fault. I just think the fact is fireball all the time, nothing but fireball. It solves all my problems. I just play a fire wizard, or I just play a fire wizard turtle. I had a blast, fireball everything, kill a thing, fuck the children.
Committed just signed out of town. We'll get into that story later.
Listen, I dropped a sleigh on a tavern. It's fine. You like the bard more. We'll get to the bard. Paladin is your number 4. I just think they're perfect. That's all I can say about them. Even the religious aspect of them all, I just think they're perfect. They're a tank. They do damage. You have smite. Like, they could probably use a little bit more spells, but not really. Like, get a lot of stuff. They get multi-attack. They just get everything. If we had to play like a D&D game for the end of the world, you just make 4, or with your typical 4-man party, you just make 4 paladins. Like, that's how I see it.
And I agree with you. The paladin is perfect. Everything is perfect. It's just gorgeous. Except the players who play the paladin, because the paladin is always misused and abused. Because I'm sure you've heard the plethora of stories of all paladins either being played as lawful stupid, or who just don't really play how a paladin is kind of meant to be played.
I think you need new friends.
Yeah, I've been scarred by a few paladins, but just people take the paladin's self-righteousness a bit too far, and I've seen a lot of cases of it.
Yeah. I could just hear the rage inside you for it, though. I think they're perfect. Yeah, I agree. It is the players that would bring that down, but my opinion, they're actually my number 1, but we'll go from there. So why the hell do you like the fighter so much?
Number 3.
So, thing is, I like the fighter for the exact same reason you like the barbarian. The fighter is super easy to understand and get into. You bonk things several times, and you bonk things really hard. The thing is, once you get to the subclasses, then fighter, especially with their martial styles and their subclasses, fighter, out of all the martial classes, is definitely the jack of all trades. And similar to the wizard, they're a jack of all trades that can also be a master of one. Because the thing is, you can take Battle Master, which is arguably the best subclass, and you have a ton of ways that you can build the subclass thanks to how maneuvers work. And I think the maneuvers are all really interesting and all have great applications. And then you even have other things like Eldritch Knight, which basically allows you to play basically a paladin. And then you've got a bunch of other cool things like the Samurai, which is focused on getting crits and doing a lot of cool things about keeping yourself alive. And even just the base subclasses with the fighter is not bad. Like, it's pretty good at just taking the fighter and making them bonk harder, keep themselves alive more, and just focus on everything that the fighter already does well. It makes them a true jack of all trades.
Honestly, everything you say there makes sense. I think purely the fact that I like the barbarian more is flavor text, rage, reckless. But everything you said makes sense. Yeah, the exact same way I see the barbarian, you see the fighter, as that It's the perfect median martial.
And another thing with fighters that I love is that fighters are so generic, which you could consider a bad thing. When you realize you could do literally pretty much anything with a fighter, you can pretty much splash any backstory. Like, you can basically take, for example, you can take a barbarian's backstory and then throw that same backstory onto a fighter, and if you build it right, you wouldn't be able to tell if that backstory is meant for this fighter or this barbarian. Like, the fighter can do anything backstory-wise, pretty much.
I think that's just good player, though. I think that's a good player.
True. That means that a bad player can definitely be a bad fighter, but that goes for like any class.
I think. Well, to be fair, if it counts, because I don't hate the fighter, I have them ranked 9. I just think that to be fair, they're probably the newbie friendly. I just think the barbarian is stronger since neither of them are roleplay heavy. Even though I actually think the barbarian can roleplay really good. Why they're mad? They're more tragic normally, and tragic is normally more interesting. But I get everything you're saying.
Yeah. To be fair, that is my one issue with the fighter, is that because of how generic the fighter is and how toolboxy and sandboxy it is, people don't usually flesh them out enough and like make them a bit too generic. But that comes down to players.
Yeah, they always go, but I'm a fighter. Okay, so my number 3 is the cleric, which we talked about. Everything you said before about they're just good. They're the supports, but they'll hit you like a truck. The only thing that
the support that doesn't feel useless, which is a great thing, that all supports should never feel just useless in certain scenarios.
That's actually well put. My only issue with the cleric is the religious part behind most of it. But I feel like most of that's I love it so much, I think, because most people will write a story around. You can be a positive or frankly vengeful, but you can have a really strong emotion and still play a cleric.
Yeah.
So I just think they're awesome. They're strong. Again, I think the bard, the cleric, the wizard, the paladin, the druid, if you just buffed everything up to these levels, D&D would feel better across the board. Where you just don't touch those 5. Just don't. So what's your number 2?
Number 2.
My number 2 is the bard.
So why do you? Because that's pretty high ranked. Why do you like the bard?
So I like the bard for mainly 2 reasons. One, they're pretty versatile. The bard can do a lot, and this is mostly thanks to magical secrets, basically allowing them to grab any 2 spells, and they can do this twice at level 10 and 14, I believe. And normally their spell list is rather restrictive in the sense that you can't really do much damage with them, but the bard also has access to some of the best spells, like silvery barbs and whatnot. They get access to a lot of powerful control spells, a lot of powerful roleplay spells, and thanks to magical secrets, you can balance this out by grabbing things like I did in the previous campaign. You can grab a bunch of other spells you don't normally get access to, things that make you good all around, like Fireball, Animate Objects, and just a lot of other powerful spells that are normally not so good because of how restrictive they are on only being on like one class's spell list. The bard's just like, now I'll take all of these broken spells.
So it's funny because I agree with everything you're saying, and my whole thing basically is I just happen to like the other one more because that's all we're picked at the top 4 or 5. It's only just it's purely because this is all opinion anyways. It's purely, hey, I've done this one, or hey, I've seen a really cool this one. Everything you're saying makes too much. Other than the fact that they're not super well damaged, yeah, you just grab Fireball later, or you just grab.
All the bard's shortcomings can be pretty easily remedied within the bear class itself, not even getting into subclasses. And the other thing that I was going to mention is that roleplay. The bard's probably the best at roleplay, second to my number 1 pick, which I'll explain in just a moment once we get to number 1 picks. But this is mostly because the bard gets access to Jack of all trades, the feature, not the metaphor we've been using, which gives them a little bit of a boost in all of their skills.
+1 everything.
Which I think is great for a roleplay-based class, or a more for a more roleplay-based class, because it just allows them to do a lot of things and basically cover the bases if you have like a fighter and a barbarian who aren't going to be able to cover those things. Even more amplified when you combine this with the fact that bards also get expertise. So if you want a bard to be really good at, say, being a detective, you can buff up their investigation and their insight and their perception, make them into this awesome detective that's great at this one thing. Or can make them into like a circus performer and have them be good with acrobatics, performance, persuasion, things like that. Just you can do so much with the bard, and they're so versatile.
I like the bard on the fact that normally fun people will pick the bard. Just a real life player, they'll be the fun player.
Yeah.
They pick the bard. The only stat that the bard doesn't do well is strength. But there's 6 stats. If you can do 5 out of 6, 10 out of 10, there's no complaint. Like,
yeah, and typically you'll have somebody else in the party who is good strength. Like you, in most parties, they'll usually have either a fighter, a rogue, or a barbarian.
You probably wouldn't see a rogue with high strength, but you might.
I've seen it work before, but we can get to that later. But yeah, I've actually seen a high strength rogue work before, but this is the bard section. Yeah, that's basically all I'd say about the bard. Great gameplay wise, great lore wise, great all around with roleplay. Just it's a very versatile class at its core.
Anything you want to share more about the bard?
Nope, that was done with my rant.
So basically everything you just said about the bard, I think about the wizard, like you brought up earlier, glass cannon. But the wizard, if there's a magic user in your group and they have an archetype in their head, the wizard can do it. I find it like that simple. We'll talk more about them individually later. So what's your number 1? Why are you wrong?
And finally, number 1.
My number 1 is the rogue, and this is the one that I wanted to fight you on. So the rogue I like for most of the same reasons that I said about other classes. Basically, roleplay-wise, the rogue is the best at roleplay, I feel, because they get so many proficiencies, they get so many expertise. And also, a rogue, realistically, depending on how you want to build them, if you want to build like a roleplay-based rogue, that's not too difficult, because you can dump their strength. Their con, you can maybe make, not necessarily dump it, but you don't have to focus too much on it. All you have to do is focus on dexterity, so you're not a liability in combat. And you have so many other skill points because you're dumping strength and not focusing too much on con. They can just become the master of talking or the brains of the group.
Oh, a good leader, yeah.
Basically, the rogue can fill any roleplay-wise.
I mean, I think everything you say makes sense. I just think that I just don't think it's high tier. I think it's the highest of the middle, right? Again, mostly, I just think it falls off later game. I think that, like, at level 20, I'm not going to play a rogue at any point. I think that's my biggest critique. The fact that you know exactly, and again, it's another class that you probably don't do strength, but you could. To be fair, the rogue is a character that you could buff any of the 6 stats and you'd be fine. Like, you would be okay.
And yeah, the rogue subclasses, the rogue's actually got a lot of good subclasses that can fit a lot of different scenarios. Like, I've already played a few rogues, and I've done a lot of things. Like, I played a swashbuckler rogue who was focused on getting in with the enemy and then managing to basically keep an enemy's attention. And I played a scout rogue who was focused on being a sniper and was being stealthy. Whenever an enemy tried to approach them, they were able to quickly get out of dodge and reposition. And then, of course, the thief subclass, despite it being the base subclass, is just really good. In fact, that's what a lot of the top classes that I've put on here have. Their base subclasses are just really good.
The rogue does get a lot of love. It just gets all of the love.
Yeah, and while it doesn't scale very well, that's a lot of the martial classes.
Yeah.
And also, it's just kind of something that happens with a lot of them, because magic just kind of scales so much better in the game.
Yeah, I think my only critique, it's a martial class. I think that's the only critique. I like, at the end of the day, that's all I'm saying. So we'll have a whole love fest about the rogue one of these days. My number 1's the paladin, because it's the only thing left. Come on. They do, I actually just think they're the fighter. Everything you said about the fighter, I think they're a fighter with magic.
Oh, yeah, there's no denying that.
They get a lot of love. They get spells. You can heal. You're a tank. You do damage. I just think that they're flawless across the board, essentially. A party of 4 paladins, lore-wise, roleplay-wise, you can really... I took an oath for blank. I did a thing for blank. You could just fill in any... And they have a lot, too. 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the book subclass. Like, you'll find the thing. And you could be a dickhead and just pick Conquest. And they get Spiritual Weapon, and it's like... or that's Conquest. But I just think they're awesome. Also, I've just... Critical Role... They had a paladin in one of their one-shots. Maybe I'll put these links in the description down the road later. But I saw someone play an Oath of Vengeance paladin. So goddamn cool. That probably sticks into it a little bit.
Yeah, Critical Role is definitely an amazing series and one of the best examples of the height of D&D. However, I don't like mentioning it too much, or at least I didn't really take it too much into consideration with my listing. And the reason for that is because Critical Role is great. It's amazing. It's the height of D&D. However, I feel like it shouldn't be kind of the example of D&D because it's kind of sets unrealistic expectations, because you have to remember Critical Role is just a group of professional actors, like voice actors, etc. We're all coming together with a plan and basically all know basically boundaries and whatnot, and I'll have basically like written characters, story written characters, and just incredibly unrealistic from what you'd expect from a normal game.
Yeah, it's the best case scenario. I guess, well, we got a second. What D&D do you watch? Podcast, YouTube, or anything? Like, is there one that you would recommend to people?
Just, I'd recommend a lot of, even though I don't agree with a lot of what a lot of them say, I'd recommend people like Puffin Forest, the DM Layer, and other sources, because while I don't agree with a lot of their points, a lot of them that tell stories, like Crit Crab and like Puffin Forest, they give you an insight into different opinions and different ways that things are run, and they're a lot more realistic and down to earth.
I listen to a podcast, D&D for Nerds. They're an Australian-based one. I think they're great. It feels like a home game.
Yeah.
I also happen to really like Dimension 20. I think Brendan Lee Mulligan, I think he's the best of, like, that's the pinnacle of DMing right there.
He's great. I've seen a lot of them.
Yeah, so those are my recommendations for stuff. We'll wind down and our next conversations we'll probably start with the worst and work our way up. Maybe a few weeks of, we'll call it low tier, mid tier, high tier. That'll be our next conversation. And we'll go in depth about like 3 classes a week or 4 classes a week kind of thing. I think that's our main plan. Is there any final thoughts you want to share about this?
Fuck the Blood Hunter.
That's a good argument. I like that argument. Well, do you want to sign us out of here then?
Yeah. Thank you everybody for listening in. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with friends and family and all that. If you want to hear more of me, you can find me on YouTube by just searching up Mage Dnd. I do a lot of streams on the weekends and whatnot, and I'm working on some content. If you want to check out Crawler is always streaming live on Twitch. You can usually find them on weekdays and sometimes on the weekends. Streaming from usually somewhere between 3 to 6 or 3 to 9. Usually depends.
Yeah, I'll put our links in the description. This is gonna be a YouTube first podcast, and then maybe we'll update it to other things if we find out people enjoy just our conversations. We would love for people to be in the comments so we know what. I don't care if you're angry about it. Yell at me all you want. I'll have a conversation with you.
If you want to argue about our choices and our rankings, go ahead. If you have your own reasons, let us know. We'd love to hear more, and we can include some of your points in our next video or our next podcast.
Why does anybody like the Blood Hunter, really?
Yeah, that'll be the question of the day. Why do you like Blood Hunter, and why are you wrong?
Yeah. Why are you wrong?
Goodbye.